I bet you're spending hours on color correction before you start color grading. The thing is, I can almost guarantee you're doing tasks that you don't even need to do. Today, I will show you what's probably wrong with your current approach and prove why color correction in and of itself doesn't exist, or at least shouldn't exist. I will also show you what to do instead so you can stop spending your time on tasks that don't even matter. As always, I do all my demonstrations in Final Cut Pro, but the concepts apply to all other NLEs as well. Remember, on this channel, we are here to learn concepts and not how to push buttons. As you've seen and heard in countless tutorials, color correction is one of the first things to do. Therefore, beginners usually jump into a project and give each clip the hyper-correction treatment. But what do I mean by that? Let's say our hypothetical beginner already knows about the proper way to work color managed. In my case, this just means I have an adjustment layer on top of all of the clips in my timeline with the proper LUT. This footage was shot on a Blackmagic camera using Blackmagic Film, and we are using the LUT Blackmagic Film to extended video in version 4. So, as you can see, if I disable this, this is the log video signal, and this is the color managed video signal. Then our hypothetical beginner usually jumps into the clip and tries to achieve a nice or correct Rec 709, whatever that may be. Starting with exposure and contrast, so they select the clip, pull up an instance of color wheels, and dial in their overall exposure. So they might alter the offset just a little bit and try to stretch their footage out between 0 and 100 or just shy of 100. Try to make the skin tones look quite nice, so we can see she has very light skin, so we can park her around, I think topping off at about 60 would be fine. And then they probably want to give this shot a little bit more contrast, so they might pull down their gamma and see what that's doing. Something like this works really well, and I think we can give the highlights just a little bit more. Okay, with exposure and contrast set, they might look at this shot and see in the RGB waveforms that it leans a little bit towards the blue side of things. So they pull up another instance of color wheels and go either in their temperature and tint or use something like their gain or their highlights wheel to run away from that blue hue just a little bit. I will eyeball it for now because this is just the beginner's demonstration. Next, they might already jump into something very targeted like skin tones. So I make my inspector a little bit bigger and pull up an instance of hue saturation curves. And we probably need to bring a draw mask along so we can isolate the skin. Something like this. I go out here and use the draw mask to sample a bit of her skin. Oops, that didn't work quite well. I might have to zoom in just a little bit. Here we go. And with her skin tone isolated, they have a look at the vector scope and sample the skin and move it around until the skin tone is on the skin tone indicator line. The skin tone indicator line is this line here in your vector scope. Usually in Final Cut Pro and DaVinci Resolve and also in Premiere Pro, you can turn it off and on using one of the drop-down menus for your scopes. So you can see here is the view option, hide skin tone indicator. If I check that, the skin tone indicator is gone. And if I uncheck this, the skin tone indicator is here again. Okay, going back, I will delete my draw mask and have a look at the before and after. So this is where our clip was before and this is where our clip is now. The skin tones are now nice and tight. Lastly, our hypothetical beginner might decide to add a little bit more meat to this image by adding another instance of color wheels and boosting the overall saturation. Something like this. From their point of view, this might qualify as a proper Rec 709 image. Then our hypothetical beginner will do this kind of treatment for the rest of the clips in their timeline, with the goal in mind to achieve a good or correct Rec 709 image. Once this is done, they might start doing some creative color grading. We can stop here because the damage is pretty much already done and I want to draw your attention to something very important. We start with our source material and then we try to achieve a nice or correct Rec 709 image. We try our best to have perfect skin tones, perfect color balance, and perfect tonal balance, meaning exposure and contrast is where it needs to be. But let's say we're going for a moody and filmic look like this. Have a look at what's happening to the image. First, we push it around to make a proper Rec 709 image out of it, but the look we want to achieve isn't even that pushed, meaning we do kind of the opposite of the things we did before. To understand this a little bit better, I think it's time for pen and paper. Imagine you're standing here at the foot of two mountains, so this is where you start. Let's call this point A. The top of the right mountain is what you want to achieve. So let's draw a little flag here. And this is your final look. But instead of going there, you take your backpack and go this route instead. So you climb the other mountain. What is this mountain? Let's call this mountain correct. And I make these quotes really big. Rec 709. Once you arrive at the top, you go part or almost all of the way back to then achieve your real goal, which is the look you want to achieve. Let me ask you an uncomfortable question. Why don't you climb the right mountain from the get-go? You've been probably told that you need this correct Rec 709 image as a baseline for your grade. Am I right? I mean, isn't this supposed to be the point of color correction? Let's go one step further. What is a correct image and who says so? What makes your exposure and contrast adjustment correct? Is it correct because you try to fill the waveform from 0 to 100 IRE? Okay then, but what about this still from the movie Promised Land? Is that incorrect then? You might say no, because this is already graded creatively, which kind of brings us back to the initial question. If this is your goal, why go here first? Now, before you throw the baby out with the bathwater, we need to address the devil in the detail, because if you don't understand this well, you will be shooting yourself in the foot. Look, the philosophy behind doing color correction before color grading is actually sound. In order to work efficiently, you need a solid foundation to establish context, which in return will help you build your color grade. However, this is where most people go wrong. A solid foundation does not equal a correct image. Furthermore, we just discussed that there is no such thing as a correct image. Let's make this very clear. What you really want is a solid foundation for your color grade. This is the key to achieve consistency and coherence. You may think this solid foundation is a corrected image, when in reality you're climbing a mountain you don't really need to climb. Because what you actually need is just a strong foundation, not more, not less. Okay, but how does this work? How do we climb the real mountain, the right mountain from the get-go? First, I'd argue let's get rid of terms like color correction. This implies that there's a correct solution you need to achieve before you can allow yourself to make decisions based on your creative intent. I think this is counterproductive and a massive weight you're carrying around, which holds you back from leaning into your creative intuition. But after all, this is what it's all about. With that out of the way, I'd like to offer a different perspective. Quick recap. You start here with your ungraded footage and you want to achieve a look. So let's call this point A and this is point B then. Now let's try to figure out how we can actually go there as fast and as efficiently as possible. Again, you have your ungraded footage, which is your starting point A, and then you have your final look, which is your point B. And you want to go from A to B as fast and as efficiently as possible. The first step is where you take care of your primary grade. Let's call this primary grade. During your primary grade, you take care of normalizing and balancing. This means adjusting exposure, contrast, and color balance to get you roughly in the right direction. So let's write this down. Normalizing and balancing. During that stage, you also take care of matching your clips to one another. This achieves context and consistency. So let's also throw matching in here. Great, now you're off in the right direction. If needed, you can move on to your secondaries. Let's write this down. So here are your secondaries. Let's quickly discuss what secondaries actually are. These are all the adjustments that involve masking or keying, or all adjustments that are very targeted, like adjusting a specific hue. For example, adjusting your skin tones. The ultimate goal after primary and secondary adjustments is to have a timeline with clips that work together. This is your solid foundation. So let's draw a line here and say all of this is your foundational work. Then and only when all of this is in place, you can move on to your look development. This is where you make sure everything comes together under one creative intent. So our last step, let's write that down here, is look development. Your look is usually a timeline-wide adjustment because again, it's supposed to tie everything together. Because you have a strong foundation underneath, it will translate beautifully to all of your clips. As you can see, all of these steps help you to get closer and closer to the top of the mountain that you actually want to climb. But remember what we discussed earlier. Establishing a strong foundation is crucial to climb the mountain as fast and as safely as possible. So watch this video next to learn exactly how to achieve the best foundation.